project, the 19th Amendment, a turning point in women's rights. The 19th Amendment, one of the most influential turning points for women's rights ever recorded to date. The 19th Amendment. It was the right that all Americans had fought for since the very beginning, the right to vote. You see, women actually had the vote before the ratification of the Constitution, but it was swiftly taken away, leaving women with no power in their government that had claimed, make no mistake, liberty and justice for all. Women were distressed, to say the least, but many attempted to become satisfied with their situation. However, there are those like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Burns, and many more that are fighters and refuse to be content with something that was obviously unfair and demeaning to women. To these women I owe my gratitude, because they proved that women weren't just given what they wanted, but they fought for it and they earned it, just like everyone else. The year is 1848, and the beginnings of change is in the air. That's where Elizabeth Cady Stanton found herself organizing the Seneca Falls Convention, the first women's convention organized by women for women in the Western world. Our ideas were so radical that I feared us to be laughed at. I mean, who ever heard of a group of women meeting to discuss their rights? Certainly not New York. Not until Lucretia Mott and I organized our own, that's for sure. At the meeting, we wrote up a list, the list of sentiments, sort of a declaration of independence for womankind, if you will. Among the things discussed at the meeting, we discussed law, abolition, and multiple conversations on women's place in society. But when a debate about the woman's right to vote came up, it quickly became the center of our efforts. You see, Mr. John Adams hadn't remembered his wife's advice to remember the ladies, and now we were going to argue for what we desired. 2 weeks later, not being received well by the men of the rest of this country, an article in the Oneida Whig described our list of sentiments as the most unnatural event in the history of humanity. I ask you, how is it unnatural in any way for us to argue for what we wanted? It is everything but unnatural for us to do so. As I stated in my keynote address, today, ladies, we have met to uplift woman's fallen divinity upon an equal pedestal with man's, and as strange as it may be to many, we now demand the right to vote under the declaration of the government in which we live. Years later, here women had picked up speed with this movement, but unfortunately, in 1870, devastation struck when African Americans got the right to vote. African American men, to be exact. Women were crushed. They had supported abolition with a full heart, but only to be, they felt, stabbed in the back. It wasn't until much, much later that the movement began to pick up speed again. But when it did, Lucy Burns was a new and upcoming leader of the movement. We are working harder and harder every day to make sure that the pleas and cries of hardworking, desperate women are heard. President Wilson, how long must we wait for liberty? How long will it take for our rights to be noticed? We tried to allow the states to get us suffrage, but by this point, we knew we had to attack the power source, the president, the White House. So we picketed, waking up extremely early in the mornings and going out and yelling till our voices were hoarse and our feet bled, even in the most freezing temperatures. The terror started with the Night of Terror, when 33 women were incarcerated under the charge of obstructing sidewalk traffic. They chained my hands to the cell bars above me, beat me with clubs until I was bleeding profusely, unable to defend myself. We endured many different kinds of physical abuse during our stay at the Auckland workhouse. We were punched, dragged, kicked, slammed, and, we lived in disgusting conditions, and they force-fed us through tubes shoved down our noses into our esophagus. Thank heavens that this brutality was discovered and made knowledgeable to the public, and due to much prodding by embarrassment, President Wilson was forced to pardon us in 1917. Then, 3 years later, in 1920,